Welcome to Bedtime Routines for Families with Young Children. If you are a family with young children, then you are most likely also a family in need of both more sleep as well as potentially some support with how to achieve more sleep for yourselves as well as for the children in the family. Young children, we know, need about 10 to 13 hours of sleep daily. And while they're darn cute once asleep, sometimes getting them there is a chore. And families may take sleep for granted for themselves as well. So we take it when and wherever we can get it. What we're going to discuss in this presentation is the importance of sleep and how creating a routine around sleep can be beneficial for a variety of reasons, including the overall health of the family. Why is a healthy bedtime experience important? First, we need to understand that sleep grows brains. The research tells us that a healthy amount of sleep is important for what we know as brain plasticity. This is the brain's ability to adapt to new input. If at any time in history we needed some flexibility in adapting to the world around us, it is now. With ever-changing experiences and circumstances, we need to be in a place where our brains can take in new information, consider the new world around us, and then make wise, conscious choices about how to respond to it. What happens is that if we sleep too little, we become unable to process new information. We don't actually learn, and we have more trouble remembering it in the future. This is because the brain falls into what we know as fight, flight, or freeze, emergency zone. And so it's attending to what's in front of us because sometimes that's chaotic. And this is an important evolutionary positive for the brain. We want the brain to be able to attend to the circumstances directly in front of it. But the problem is that when it's only able to attend to the crisis of the moment, it loses its capacity to be sort of planful and thoughtful, all the things that we know to be learning. Sleep can support the brain's ability to gather information, keep information, and essentially learn. Additionally, I want to share that a well-managed bedtime can be an opportunity for families. It's a chance where we as the grown-ups can teach our children self-care. This lays the groundwork for working memory, attention, and other cognitive skills. It's also an opportunity to strengthen the parent-child relationship, a time when connection can be established, when positive feelings can be accessed, provided we take the time to think about what a good bedtime routine might look like. We're going to go over both of these reasons why a healthy bedtime experience is important in detail, thinking about how these processes work, and then tools, tips for how we can implement them in our own bedtime practices. An essential skill that we now understand to predict lifelong academic and success in other ways as adults is self-regulation. We also know that sleep supports the development of that part of the brain. What do we mean by self-regulation? Well, self-regulation is the ability to bring yourself back to balance when you've gone out of balance. It develops through interactions with caregivers, such as parents, guardians, even teachers, coaches, mentors. It's important to understand that this is a skill, much like riding a bike. It doesn't just develop, but it has to be practiced. And additionally, the more support we have in that practice, like the training wheels on the bicycle or the adult holding the back of the seat, the more likely it is that self-regulation will be built slowly in a developmentally appropriate manner in a way that the child can build upon and hold on to for the future. Self-regulation development is dependent on the adults in the environment being the co-regulators. We find children in the space of dysregulation, and what we want is for them to move to the ability to self-regulate. But along the way there are the training wheels. That's us, the adults who are both modeling these regulation practices as well as holding the hand of the child. And that may look like soothing or acknowledging that the child is having a difficult time and then offering some tips, some suggestions, tactics for the child to be able to come back into a place of self-regulation. The more we as adults can be predictable, responsive, and create supportive environments for children, the more children will be able to go into a place of dysregulation, but with all those supports in place, have the capacity to start to build the ability, holding our hands through it, to come back to self-regulation. So in that process, one very important variable are the healthy sleep antecedents, what we know of as the things that we need to do in advance of bedtime to ensure that children have all the supports necessary in their environment to build that self-regulation skill that then we can practice at bedtime. The first is adult self-care. We always say, put your own oxygen mask on first. This is essential. If we are not in a healthy space with adequate sleep, feeling okay, then we're more likely to find childhood behaviors that are really developmentally appropriate to be challenging. And so the first step is always to figure out how in your schedule you can ensure that you are taking care of yourself. The next healthy sleep antecedent, or what we want to put in place to ensure that healthy sleep can be attained and a happy, peaceful, joyful bedtime is possible, is getting lots of exercise, getting outside, doing the things that the body needs to feel like it has utilized the energy it has in a useful way, in a healthy way, and can be ready to rest. Ensuring that kids get that kind of time to move, but also to be outdoors, is especially essential to a healthy bedtime. So if you are having challenges at bedtime, an important question to ask is, what was our day like? Were we able to utilize the natural energy of our 4-year-old, or are they still needing to expend some of that? I've heard many stories of parents who, have routines towards the end of the day, right before dinner, that no matter what, the weather, the circumstances, the mood, the homework, they make sure that kids get outside and run amok for a little while, because we understand that that will be essential to them winding down in the next 3 or 4 hours and going to bed. Another healthy sleep antecedent is to build these self-regulation skills that we discussed. If we want children to be able to come back to balance from a place of imbalance, then we need to help them along the way. Tools like calming breathing, or some stretching, or even games that utilize focus and attention will tire children out in a useful way that will support healthy sleep as opposed to television or video games, which are exhausting, but in a way that that activates the nervous system and makes them less able to go to sleep. And the last healthy sleep antecedent I'd like to mention is teaching children feeling words, so that if big emotions do arise at bedtime, which is the likely time for them to come up when things get quiet, when things get dark, when there's space for the brain to start to process its day, emotions arise. What might be helpful is to have a vocabulary for those emotions, a way to discuss with your child what they're feeling, what memories they're having, what anxieties they may be having. But that's work that you have to do in advance. At bedtime is not the time to teach those words, but rather all through the day and all through a child's development, acknowledging that feelings exist, acknowledging that there are words for a variety of feelings, not just happy and sad, and allowing there to be space throughout the day, not just at bedtime, when feelings can be acknowledged, named, and processed, so that that work doesn't all have to happen right before we're trying to wind down and go to sleep. In addition to the things that we can do in advance of bedtime, what's really important to give ourselves the best chance at healthy sleep and a joyful bedtime process is routines. Ensuring that there's a consistency and predictability, again, that word predictability, to bedtime will reduce the likelihood that challenging behaviors arise at that time. If kids know what is supposed to happen, that they feel in control of that process, and that there are no potentials for suddenly a snack when a snack really isn't the most useful thing, or suddenly another glass of water when a glass of water is not really the most useful thing. If we give in to those things regularly, then no routine is established. But once we establish a routine, when the snack happens, when the water happens, when the story happens, then children tend to not just get on board with that routine, but actually benefit from feeling empowered by knowing the routine and moving you through the routine rather than being told what's next. That's the key piece, is that children, if they don't feel empowered, they will try to grab hold of power, right? And so when you want them to go to bed, they're going to want to do something else. But if you give them power over the routine and they know the routine and you let them lead through the routine, then that struggle is less. Research tells us that children who follow bedtime routines are more likely to go to sleep earlier, take less time falling asleep, they sleep longer, and they wake up less during the night. Let's think about some do's and don'ts for these routines. First, the do's. Do be consistent. Choose a routine. Once you get solid on a routine that works, be consistent with it. Do it every day. Keep it short and sweet. The bedtime routine should not be a 2-hour process. 30 minutes is probably sufficient to move children from being active in participating in activities to being in bed. Do adapt to children's needs and children's evolving needs. So different age children may need the routine to be slightly different. You may need to think about going earlier or going later depending on the child's age, and which pieces the child should be capable and want to do on their own. Like, when is a child able to brush their teeth themselves or even manage the shower and bath process themselves, and when is it more appropriate for the parent to be involved or guardian. And then try to keep good sleep hygiene. Lots of times, very simple variables are what are keeping children from just relaxing, enabling the body to relax. Too much light, too warm, those are problems for children that get in the way of them being able to just settle in. So keeping the room dark, keeping it cool, and a quiet room, not just in the room, but if you have a small house or if there are other children or pets in the house, keeping the outside of the room quiet as well. Things we don't want to do. We don't want to start too late. Once the child is already oversleepy, we all know what that child looks like and what it's like to attempt to maneuver them towards sleep, right? It just doesn't happen happily. So you want to start this process before the child is too sleepy. You don't want to use screens. Again, what screens do is excite the nervous system. They make children sort of groggy, but not actually calm. And so then they're in that oversleepy but excited nervous system state, and that's a really hard place to go to sleep from. So that bedtime is not the time for screens to be the babysitter. We don't want to run them around and get them wired right before sleep. So in the example I gave earlier, I said maybe right before dinner time. You want to have some wind down time after the run around. You don't want to feed sugar or caffeine. It's very tempting to give that sweet after dinner, particularly as a bribe to go to bed. It's just going to be counterproductive to you. Let the sweets happen earlier in the day. You want to assess your bedtime story carefully. Scary stories are not a good idea right before bedtime. You can have those in the morning or at the lunchtime or something like that. But in the evening, we want reassuring, calming stories. And then try your best not to abandon the routine on the weekends or on holidays. Of course, we all have a day here or there where grown-up life gets in the way, and maybe you have a babysitter, or maybe you've gone to, a friend's or relative's house and you get home late. It does happen, but as best as possible, pick up the routine right from there. And as best as possible, particularly while you're establishing the routine, try to prioritize bedtime over these other activities. And just a few more suggestions regarding the bedtime story, because these questions do come up often. What should the bedtime story be like? First, you want it short, or a few short books, right? But less than 5 minutes of story for young children is appropriate. And then commit to that. There's always the one more chapter question. Decide on the number of books or the number of chapters in advance, and then stick with that. The more often you give in to one more chapter, the more often the question will arise, and the more challenging it will be to convince the child to stop. Make sure the fear factor is low. We talked about that. What you want are these stories not to excite the nervous system, which brings us to my least favorite bedtime book, though it is a favorite book in our household. Things like The Five Little Monkeys. Sounds like a fabulous bedtime story, but inevitably, in my house anyway, it always ended up with kids jumping on the bed, which was not a great step towards sleep. So this might be a book for another time, even though it says it's about bed and sleep. You want to assess whether not to put down The Five Little Monkeys, but in general, you want to assess whether your book is actually, for your individual child, exciting them or calming them. And what you want is to move towards calm. And finally, considering transitions and changes as a potential reason why bedtime is hard. In general, what is happening in a child's life? A new school. In our world right now, every day is a constant surprise and change, be it whether you're wearing mask or not wearing the mask, whether you're going to school or doing it remote. There are many transitions happening in the world and in children's worlds. And so that can cause children to be a little less capable of calming down at bedtime. But additionally, bedtime is a transition on its own. It's transitioning from active to passive. And transitions in general are hard for small children. So we have to take that transition time seriously. And that's why the routines become so important. Anytime there's a transition, some warning, some process or routines, as we said, and then some commitment and consistency in those routines is essential. Bedtime is no different. I wish you well with your bedtime routines. Please feel free to reach out to me by email if you have any questions. I look forward to hearing about your own practices regarding bedtime.